If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is not going to be on the streets. This revolution is not about burning cars. This revolution is about building cars to sell them and make our own money. So essentially, this revolution is in the mind, because if we are not in charge of our mind, then the oppressor will use our bodies as a tools of oppression to oppress us and to oppress our people. Freedom and decolonization. This is Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party. We greet you with our revolutionary greetings by saying that peace and love. And thank you very much for joining us today on our weekly discussion where we talk about things that are important, things that matter for African future, African liberation and African emancipation. Brothers and sisters, today I want to discuss with us about a simple topic that, it's based on the question that we often receive as an organization, African Continental Unity Party. People always ask if we are open to work with other people, for example, with Eurasian people, right? Because ACP is an African organization. And most of people who ask that question are African themselves. And when we answer, for example, in saying that we are not open to work with other people, for instance, we are not open to work with European people, we are not open to work with Asian and stuff like that. This is solely an African organization. People get disappointed. You see that Africans are not happy with that answer, because that way of answering shows that we are not willing to achieve unity. We are not willing to achieve harmony in the world. We are not open to work with other people who can assist us to solve our problems as African people. That's the reason why I want us to do a quick analysis of this situation by us asking the question, can we really achieve meaningful results as African people by working with other people, by working with European people, Asian people, for example? Or let me rephrase the question, can Africa be liberated by working together with the European people, with Asian people, with Indians, with Arabs? Can this kind of work be the work that will be able to liberate and emancipate Africa? And from our perspective as Afrocentric Pan-Africanist revolutionaries, we believe that this cannot be the case. We believe that the liberation that Africa is seeking for or is longing for will never be achieved by working with other people. It's only Africans themselves who can do something to achieve the liberation that they are looking for. And I'm going to make a quick analysis here to actually explain the reason behind our standing on this question. But before even we get there, what is more important, what is more striking about this whole thing is that you come to other countries where white and black are living together. For example, in South Africa, you find that there is a place called Orania where white Afrikaners themselves are settled, and they cannot allow other people, particularly black people, to go and settle there. Black people are not allowed to go in that community and live there. If any black person is found there, is the one, is a gardener, is, the cleaner, is the, he does those kind of stuff, and at sundown, he must leave the town. And people don't see an offensive act on that setup. People don't seem to be, to be surprised by that reality right here in South Africa. But when a black organization comes and says that we are only pro-black, we don't include ourselves, we don't mix ourselves with the other color, it becomes a problem for many African people. It becomes, they call us names. They said, you guys are radicalist, you guys you are racist, you are practicing injustice against other people who feel like they want to participate in the struggle for African liberation and assist to further the struggle. That's how we are being called. But when things like that happen, whereby white people or Arab people, Indian people regroup themselves among themselves and say that we are forming an organization only for us and not for other people, it doesn't offend any African person. But I understand why that is the case. Simply because the psychology of African people has been destroyed, so that us on our own as African people, we don't see ourselves as worth it. We don't see ourselves as fit to solve our problems. We only have a hope to see a solution when we see a white color part of that solution, or part of the process that will bring about that solution. So you see, during the colonialism, during the slavery, during the apartheid in the case of South Africa, black people were dehumanized, were reduced to the level of animal, where they had to sit down and look up to the white man, who is the one who was the one who had the decisions over the lives of black people and over all the reality in the country, for example. And that same psychology is still driving many African people today to believe that it is only the white man who has a say over the situation that we are going through today as African people. So for you to have an organization that is credibility, you must have white color in that organization, so that you can believe that, well, we have white person here, then this organization will be able to solve our problems. But if you see only black, you don't have trust, because it is the same picture of enslavement in which we are coming from, where among ourselves as black enslaved, we didn't have much to do to bring about solutions, or to bring about change, or to bring about important responses that we want at that time. We had to cry to the white man to give us education. We had to cry to the white man to give us economy. We had to cry to the white man to give us liberation or independence. And that is the same situation today. That's the reason why African people, for them to give us credibility, they want to see African people, European people, particularly white people, giving us credibility. Then they will begin to give us credibility. For black people to join us, to trust this organization, to work with us, and to build this thing together as African people, they want to see first if there's European people who approve what we are doing. And if there's no approval of white people, if there's no approval of Chinese or Indians or Arabs or any other color than African color, most of Africans have difficulty to believe that we are genuine at what we are doing, and we are potentially we have the potential to succeed in what we are doing. So that's the situation. So it comes from colonialism, neo-colonialism, slavery, everything that we have gone through, which have transformed our mind as African people to be the people who consider themselves as children of a lesser God. Now, why don't we believe that working with the European people will solve the problem of Africa? Firstly, because there's no common solution. Yes, there's no common solution. There's no common solution because there's no common problem in the world today. Even though we have certain institutions in the world today which claim to have been created from a common or collective problems or collective worldview, we don't have common problems, we don't have common solutions, we don't have common history either. So what we consider as a problem for us as African people may not be necessarily a problem for European people. may be actually a solution for European people. That's what we need to understand. Even though we have the World Trade Organization, we have the World Health Organization, we have the United Nations, we have all these, the World Banks, we have all these institutions of international calibers. The problem is, because what the picture they are trying to paint is that we have collective problems, we have common problems, therefore we have these international institutions to solve common problems, to find common solutions. The reality is there is no common solutions because there was never a common problem. And I'm going to explain that throughout this video so that we understand what we are talking about. Even though today we are talking about the environmental degradation, and it's mostly said that the weather, when it changes, when the environment changes, when the global warming happens, it hits everybody. Therefore, it's a collective problem. And based on that analysis, they've created what is called sustainable development, an agenda of sustainable development. I've explained in one of our previous presentation the true meaning of sustainable development. It is to prevent us as African people to utilize our resources, our natural resources, so that we can develop our countries and cater for the future of our children. Then we need to keep these resources for European children of the future to come and use them, because currently we are not having access to these resources. We are not benefiting from our resources. We are not, making our living from our wealth as African people. It is the European children today who are benefiting from our resources. What tells you that your children then will have to benefit from these resources if you don't have access to them? So this is the true agenda of sustainable development. I will encourage you to look on that video and find what we have presented as our analysis. So this is to say, even though they're trying to paint a picture that seems to say that we have collective difficulties in the world, we have collective problems, therefore we need collective solutions, there was never collective problems and there's no collective or common solutions. Let's us understand this from an analysis that I want to make. You see, every people today, European people as well as African people, we have a past, we have a history. Now, when a European person think about the history, he finds some reasons to celebrate. When a Caucasian person projects himself in the history, he celebrates. And what he celebrates is actually his conquest of other people. He celebrates his fathers, his ancestors who were able to conquer the world, who were able to conquer Africans, who were able to enslave Africans, who were able to reduce Africans to the level of animals so that Europe can exploit the resources of other countries, of other lands, of African people to build European countries. This is what the history means to the mind of European person, whether they talk about it or not, but that's a reality. When they talk about their history, when they look at the history, that's what they see. They celebrate their achievement in the past. They celebrate their excellency, which means the downgrades, the enslavement of African people is what European people celebrate. And they celebrate their ancestors. Their major figures in the European history are those who have contributed to divide Africa, to conquer Africa. People like King Leopold II of Belgium, people like General de Gaulle in France. Those are the people who have conquered Africa, and those are the people who obviously symbolize some kind of excellency of European achievement. That's what comes to the mind of European people when they think about the history, right? That is in the context of celebration. And if they have to speak, if we have to speak now in the context of for example, of Congolese, in the context of Nigeria, in the context of Ghana, if we want to think about the history, what comes to our mind? Oppression, enslavement, colonialism, and today neocolonialism. That is what comes to our mind, because Congo, Nigeria, Ghana, Guinea, South Africa, Senegal, all these countries, Kenya, Tanzania, were born in colonialism, are the children of colonialism, are the results of colonialism, of the conquest of Africa. Our ancestors never created these countries. It was the European colonizers, European oppressors who created these countries. Therefore, when you speak about Congo, when you think about the history in the Congolese perspective, you only see the beginning of Congo as a colonialism. You don't see what happened before colonialism, because Congo in its current context did not exist, because Nigeria, because Guinea, any African country in its current setup did not exist before colonialism. Therefore, the history of Congo begins with oppression of African people. So you as a Congolese, or you as a South African, you as a Ghanaian, when you think about the history, when you project yourself in the history as a Ghanaian, what you see is your oppression. What you see is your suffering. What you see is what you have gone through in the hands of European people who conquered your world. So you see, already from the history, we have two different things. I mean, it could have been much better if we had to think about the history as African, because when you think about it as African, you don't see colonialism, because Africa existed before colonialism. So when you think about it as African, you see first of all the glorious moment that we have gone through by being those who brought civilization to the world, by being those who built the pyramids, by being those who discovered science, by being those who discovered astronomy, astrology, all these spirituality, all these things that have become the basis of the modern civilization. We are the ones who discovered them. So when you think about it in the context of Africa, as I think about it as a Pan-Africanist, then I look at myself that I have enjoyed a moment of glory, a moment of prosperity. Why? Right? And then it came time whereby I was conquered by oppressors, by Greeks, by Romans, by Arabs, by Europeans, Spanish, Portuguese, or all these countries. And I went through slavery, colonialism. So my history does not start with the colonialism. It does not start with slavery if I think about myself as an African person, right? Because I have a long history before colonialism and slavery. And when I look at that, then I will understand what made me to lose the power that I had before colonialism, before slavery. What made me, what triggered, what facilitated slavery over my life, and what can I do better today to prevent that situation from happening again in the future over the life of my children and my 4 kids. You see, if we think about it in an African perspective, that's what comes to our mind. When we look at the history as African or as a Pan-Africanist, that's what comes to our mind. We were united, we were people. You know, we had to be divided, we had to be conquered. But now, what can we do to rise again? But when you think only in the context of your ethnicity, in the context of your country, the only thing that you see is oppression, because your country was born in the oppression and is still going through that oppression, because it was indeed created to keep you under oppression. That's why we call these countries colonial enclosures as a Pan-Africanist. Now, already you see that the picture's clear. When we talk about the history, European people have something else in mind. They celebrate their conquest of the world. And when it comes to African people, we have nothing to celebrate. As a Congolese and Nigerian, we actually look at it in a way that it has affected us today. Because through slavery, colonialism, our lives are what they are today. We are unable to enjoy the resources of our lands, even though we live in the richest land in the world. You see, so we don't have the same history. We don't have the same perception of the history. It's only those stupid Africans who will celebrate people like General de Gaulle, who celebrate people like Leopold II, we celebrate European heroes, right? Trying to mix themselves or to include themselves in the European history. But in reality, is not the case. Even when the African soldiers were used to fight next to the French soldiers so that they can win the Second World War, after the Second World War, Africans or African were excluded, were not recognized. So we are not part of the history of European people as much as they are not part of us. The only time we come together is when they are oppressing us and when we try to resist the history, to resist their oppression. That's the history. Already totally different, and our lives today are built on the history. So if we have a different history, it means that we have different reality today, we have different problems today, and we have definitely different future or different solutions for the future. Because in the past, the solution for African people was the end of slavery, but the solution for European people was to keep Africans under this subjection as long as possible, so that they can, as much as possible, so that they can reap the resources of Africa. And today, when you go through other countries such as Angola, South Africa, even in America, countries where you see black people and white people living together, you will see that there's some kind of animosity in the society. Animosity on the side of white people, which shows that they are kind of nostalgic about what they have lost, because they would have wanted the situation to remain the same, whereby black people were their servants, eternal servants, sitting at their door to serve them, right, and eating the crumbs that fell under their door. Fell under the table. So the reality that is happening today of seeing white people and black people going to the same cinema, for white people, it disturbs their mind. Going to the same bathroom, to the same toilets, it disturbs their mind. Going to the same schools, white and black, it disturbs their mind. So you see also the present is still quite different from the past, and that's the reason why some white people will stand up, will take courage to stand up and to say we don't want to mix with the black people, and they will build some institutions exclusively for themselves, such as Orania case that I've just spoke about. It is happening right now. So it shows that even in the present time, many white people don't understand it, why we have come to live with these people together, right? They would have wanted us to be living in that situation where they have toilets for white, separate from toilets for black and stuff like that. That's the current mindset, current struggle. And when it comes to the side of black people, many of black people celebrate today for the fact that we are now allowed to go into the restaurants with white people. We are not allowed to go to the same schools with white people. We are now allowed to marry white people. We are now allowed to live, side by side with white people, something that was impossible. To go to the same school today, for some black people, it's a celebration, because things that we didn't have during the time of physical colonialism or slavery, we are allowed to have them today. So for them is a celebration and gratitude towards European nations or white people for having given them this kind of privilege and something like that. So this is how we generally, right? There can be always exception to every rule, but generally this is how the analysis of the history and of the present happen to be when it comes to European people and African people. So we don't have the same analysis, the same understanding, or the same observation of reality based on its historical perspective and based on the present perspective. And these two differences obviously becomes hindrance to forge common goals for the future, because normally or remarkably the past is different, the present obviously is different in the mindset of African people and the mindset of European people. Therefore, even the future is also different when we want to analyze what we can do for the future. What are the objectives of the future? What are the goals we have to form for the future? What is the vision that we need to create for the future? There will be always difference between what African people want versus what European people want, and therefore it is impossible to talk about collective goals, common goals and stuff like that. For example, whether we go in the United Nations today, together, whether we go into the world organizations today, all of us, whether we go in the World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, whatever organizations or international criminal courts, right? Whether we go on in those institutions together. The problem is, in the bottom line for European people, and whatever they do is to maintain their domination of other people and their exploitation of the resources of other people for the rest of this century and for the future centuries. That's a reality. And there are a lot of proofs, a lot of evidence, and we can sit here until tomorrow talking about evidence and analyzing them to obviously prove the statement that I've just made. Even if we go together in those institutions, for European peoples is about dominating other people through those institutions. Even though we look at them, from us as African people, we look at them as institutions for collective solutions of the world. So even though they're talking about things that appear to be of collective concern, of common concern, as far as our world comes in the picture, the reality is, in the mindset of European, is all about keeping their domination, keeping their oppression and exploitation of other people and the resources. The reason why, the proof is simple, or the fact is simple. When you look at the structure of the United Nations, you see that there are, I think, 6 or 5 countries, actually 5 countries only, who have the veto rights in that institution. It means those are the ones who can say, no, this policy cannot pass, yes, this policy should pass. Those are the ones who possess the nuclear power. Those are the ones who call themselves the superpower of the world, and those countries happen to be European countries and China, or Eurasian countries to be more precise. There's no African country that is having a veto right at the United Nations. So this is to say that it is all about finding a way to get people closer, other people closer, through the propaganda of inclusiveness, but getting those people closer in order to oppress them and to exploit them better and to keep your domination over them. You see, and we see that today, between the war, in the war that is happening between the European countries and the Chinese and Russian. And we see that it's all about domination and oppression. And we see that Africans have been compelled to side with European peoples, right? And when Africans try to make their own decision to say, okay, no, we want to stay neutral in this conflict, or we want to go and ally ourselves maybe with Russia, because we see that Russia is more credible partner. They are being sanctioned, they are being threatened, and they are being obviously deprived with certain opportunities or certain things that they were given before, such as loans and stuff like that. And this is always about keeping people closer in order to dominate them. So in the mind of European people is about how can we keep our domination over African people and over the resources of Africa for the rest of this century and for the future centuries, so that our kids will benefit from the resources of Africa at the expense of African people and African children, to be more precise. This is what is in the mindset of European people. But in the mindset of African people, when we go into those institutions, unfortunately, we believe that we are going there to collaborate for a better future of the world. We're going there to collaborate for a collective future of the world. We're going there to discuss about collective objectives, collective goals of the world. And at the end of the day, we get disappointed. We find ourselves that what we had in our mind is not exactly what is happening. It's not exactly what's going to happen in the future for our children and our 4 children. And this is a reality. Look at the world today. In case you have forgotten, as we discussed this topic some times ago, the Americans have divided the world since the end of the Second World War into different parts, and Africa was what was called the Grand Area. Since America became the superpower of the world at the end of the Second World War, the American empire had objectives to keep Africa under their domination, so they called Africa Grand Area. And what they wanted for Africa was to supply the raw materials that the Americans and their allies want. And the second role that they wanted for Africans was to make Africans the consumers of the products developed from the West. And that has been the reality today. Our presidents, our so-called leaders, go to the World Bank, go to the IMF to borrow money there, money which they cannot utilize to properly develop their countries because of what is called the structural adjustment program, which prevents African countries from utilizing the money borrowed from the World Bank, from IMF, in the projects such as agricultural projects or projects that will eventually subsidize local development initiatives or local entrepreneurship initiatives, so that Africa can produce things for herself, can transform her raw materials into products which Africa needs. Africa is prevented, is not allowed to do that with the money borrowed from the World Bank and the IMF. The only thing that Africans can do with this money is to go back to Europe to buy the trucks, to buy the 4x4 trucks, or to buy the Hilux cars or SUVs, stuff like that, to give to their ministers, to give to the state representatives and stuff like that. So it means you borrowed this money to go back and buy the products developed in the West, right, by the West, and then consume these products, and you still have to pay the money with the interest added to that. And the money need to be paid in the US currency. So you borrowed it in US currency, you pay back in US currency, which you don't print. How are you going to get that money plus the interest? And that's the reason why Africa is always in the debt, and the debt, it seems to be not finishing, because we don't print this money. Therefore, they have to come and invade our land and take our resources, and we kind of seem to be in the cycle which seems to not end. And it is the blood of the poor, it is with the blood of the poor, especially with our poor children, that this money get paid and doesn't finish. The debt seems to be not finishing, because we still need to go back and borrow more money to keep our institutions functioning, right? Because we are unable to pay the loan completely. So this is a situation. So this is a system put in place to keep African people under the wing of European domination and European oppression, because domination will always give birth to oppression. A person who is dominated cannot flourish, because once you find yourself in a situation of domination, you will ultimately be an oppressed entity, because being dominated, you cannot do something that comes out of your mind, because what you have to do is to depend on the entity that has domination over you to do anything that you want. You need authorization, or you need approval from the entity that dominates you to do things that you want, and not to do things that you want to do. And those things that you want to do are not necessarily the things that you want, but the things that that entity that dominates you wants you to do, and wants you to do in order for it to keep its domination over you. Because John Henry Clark told us that a strong person cannot teach you on how to get rid of his domination over you. That is something that you learn on your own. So the bottom line of this presentation is actually a question that I want to ask all of you, or all of us as African people, so that we can reflect and think about it. What is then the purpose of us as African people engaging in political discussion or debates with European people if we don't have the common solution, if we don't have a common way of looking at the reality of the world, or even if we, and also since we don't have the common past? Should I rephrase myself again? What is the purpose of us engaging in political debates, even economic debates with European people for things that concern us as African people, since we don't have the common goals for the future. We don't have the common present analysis of the situation, and we don't have the common analysis of the past, as I've just explained. Why do we engage in political or economic debates or discussions? This is the question. Because the reason why we are engaging in political debates is because we want to analyze a political situation that affects us in the same way, and after that analysis we can come up with political objectives which are common, since the situation that affects us is common, and forge the common future for all of us. That is why we go into what we call national political debates, right? That's why we go into continental political debates sometimes. So in a nutshell, there's no collective solution. So there's no way that an intelligent African person will sit with European people to discuss about the future of the world. If European people want to participate in the struggle for African liberation and emancipation, they must go to their counterparts, Europeans, to tell them to stop the agenda of oppression. They must go to the World Trade Organization to tell them to stop taking authority on the raw materials or on the resources of Africa and determining the price of Africa. They must leave that that prerogatives to the African people themselves to determine the values of their resources. So they must go to their own institutions to advocate, but they shouldn't be part of our own institutions or our own discussions, because they will take over, they will always dominate, and they will drive that agenda according to their vision of the world, which is to keep Europe in the dominant position of the world and other people under the subjection of European people. Now, one thing I did not speak is, what is then the goals of African people? When we look in the past, I'm not talking about the goals based on the tribalistic or micro-ethnic tendency of I'm Nigerian, I'm Congolese, I'm Ghanaian, I'm South African. No. These were things created by Europeans. These countries, we call them as Afrocentric people or Pan-Africanist, we call them colonial enclosures, which cannot allow you to flourish and to live the life that the Creator, meant for you or designed for you and for I to live as African people. But when we look at the reality, when we conceive the reality from an Afrocentric perspective, from a Pan-Africanist perspective, then we analyze the history of Africa, as glorious as it was, and we see the tragic moment we have gone through to be what we are today. We can then forge a collective goal as African people, because we were all dehumanized, not based on our Congolese nationality or South African nationality, but because we are African people and what we represent to the world. So based on this, at least we have the opportunity to forge some goals, and these goals, as I said, they are different from the goals that Europeans forge, because from Europeans is about domination, but for us as African people, the goals will be, number one, liberation, total liberation of Africa and of African people worldwide, and number two, our self-emancipation, which should be emerging from our self-determination to do for ourselves what other people have been pretending to do for us. These are the goals of Africa. So you must understand, the liberation of Africa is the downfall of countries that have been depending on Africa to build their countries. For example, we know France does not have natural resources, and if you ask any French citizen, and this question was obviously asked to one of the French authority, how comes that you don't have natural resources but you are among the richest countries in the world or the powerful countries in the world? And what he said was, in France, indeed, we don't have resources, but we have ideas. So can you feed your children with ideas alone? No, you need resources. So what he meant was that we take the ideas that we have, we apply them on African resources to exploit them and to build ourselves. You see, that's what the French people think. So if Africans get to the point where they have to liberate themselves, then it's the downfall of French, French government or of French civilization, because they don't have other place to go to exploit and to get whatever they need. We know that French reap about 450 billion US dollars every year from 14 countries that are under French domination every year. So if these countries had to come together and stand against the French oppression and French neoliberalism or French domination, France will go down. So that's what I'm saying. We don't have the same objectives, because our objectives is to rise, and once you rise, you make fall the one who are sitting on your back. As Dr. John Henry Clark said, that only a slave can abolish slavery, because if somebody's sitting on your back, it's up to you to take a position to adjust yourself so that you can make fall the person that is sitting on your back. And the only position that you have to take to balance the one who's sitting on your back is to stand straight up. So if our goal is to stand up, it means it will be the downfall of England, of America, of all these entities that have been depending on exploiting the resources of Africa in order to build their countries. So do you think they will have the same objective as us? Do you think France wants you to make them fall? Do you think America want us to make them fall? Do you think Germany, England want us to to make them fall willingly? No. It's something that we're gonna do by our own initiatives and by our own strength, right? Because if it was by force that we were taken down, that we were oppressed, that we were enslaved, that we were colonized, if it is by force and by brutality that we find ourselves in these conditions where we are today, conditions in which Africa is rich but African people are poor, it only means that it takes also the same power, the same equivalence of power and brutality that will have to get rid of this domination, that will have to rise. And to do that, we'll have to make fall down the person or the people who have kept us in these conditions. Therefore, in conclusion, we cannot have the same goals, and there's no need for African people to be always children who are ready to go to the Beijing Forum on Africa, to what was called again? What is called Russia African Forum, New York African Forum, Paris African Forum. You see our leaders like children going, all of them, into these forums. I don't know why, for what solutions, which we are unable to create with our own minds. I hope this brief presentation has been useful to you, and if it is, please subscribe, like and share the video to encourage us and to get more people subscribing to our channel. There are more contents that we'll have to create to benefit our people, for the re-education of our people. And this re-education implies, obviously, de-educate ourselves, if I can use that term, from the intoxication of Eurocentric notions of life, and then re-educate ourselves with different notions of life that are relevant to our reality as African people and our reality of the future, our prospect, or better future actually. So thank you very much for your patience today. Peace and power to all of you African people. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution, and this revolution is in how we think, right? Not really on how we do with our hands, but firstly on how we think, because the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor, in the hands of our oppressor, the most potent weapon currently in the hands of European people now is not the nuclear weapon, but it is the mindset of African people. If we are able to capture, to recuperate our own mindset, we are indeed free from nuclear power. We are freed from whatever atomic bombs, whatever we can think about, and we will be people in charge of our own destiny and of our own future. Thank you very much. Please share and subscribe and like the video or comment to encourage us. We see you next time.